China, one of the world's top 10 most prominent countries and home to over 1.4 billion, is currently on the brink of a catastrophic economic collapse. There's certainly a lot to unpack, from the rigorous COVID-0 policy regarding lockdowns to a crashing housing market and bank account freezes. So, what is it that puts China's economy at full risk of collapsing? China appears to be facing a series of issues, creating somewhat of a domino effect that will have a lasting negative impact on its economy and residents of the country. Despite being the second biggest economy in the world, China has acquired a significant amount of debt, further exacerbated by the zero-COVID policy. The country where COVID-19 first originated has some of the most stringent policies regarding the virus, many of which have negatively impacted the economy and travel, which also led to problems for residents of China. During lockdowns, it has become increasingly difficult for residents to access food and necessities for personal hygiene. Residents in some areas, such as Yining, have spoken out about not having access to food, going hungry, and getting stuck in dreadful quarantine camps that have made life miserable. With its strict policy, large parts of China may be shut down to prevent the spread of the virus. In some cases, however, cities have experienced lockdowns that have gone on for more than a month, causing most to feel isolated and angered by the lack of support and assistance provided to them throughout the lockdown period. While some may agree that lockdowns are necessary to prevent the spread and protect the people of China, others have noticed that these strict measures are often a bit unnecessary and, at times, out of control when large cities are left without a source of food and necessities. Of course, with lockdowns comes strict travel guidelines, meaning China has lost millions of dollars in revenue. Despite being one of the several tourism-dependent countries, international travel to China is currently at an all-time low, putting even more economic pressure on the country. But is COVID-19 to blame for the potential collapse of one of the largest economies in the world? Not quite. Although it has played a role in causing such destruction, there's so much more to this collapse than what meets the eye. Recently, more than 400,000 people in China had the unfortunate experience of finding out their bank accounts were frozen, leading to social unrest. These individuals only realized they couldn't access their money when they attempted to make withdrawals from their accounts and were denied access to the funds. As soon as this happened, the people began to panic, and who wouldn't when attempting to access their hard-earned money? The people of China were livid and wanted to know what was happening to the money they thought was safe and secure in their accounts. The bank freezes resulted from a fraudulent Ponzi-style scheme that had been taking place behind the scenes for over a decade, with many utterly oblivious to what was happening. Although the bank freezes only impacted a handful of financial institutions, hundreds of others are still at risk, meaning the people of China have to worry about the safety and security of any money placed into their accounts. That sounds all too familiar, doesn't it? If you take a look back in time, the United States experienced something similar during the Great Depression of 1930, when more than 700 banks failed, thus leaving residents with little to no money. Sadly enough, it appears China is going through this same experience, except even worse than anything the United States has ever experienced. Because of the bank freeze situation, many protests took place, with residents taking a stand and demanding their money. While the people of China have conducted peaceful protests to demand what rightfully belongs to them, the Chinese Communist Party, otherwise known as the CCP, has worked overtime to censor these protests. In addition, the CCP continues to make attempts at shielding the rest of the world from learning about what is happening in the country. One would hope that it stops there, but it only continues to get progressively worse due to the mortgage crises in China. Let's face it, if you've ever been to China or know a lot about the country, you know that properties are a big deal for the people who live there. Real estate in China is the ideal representation of a person's social status, so everyone wants to own property. It's one of the many reasons real estate prices have increased over the past several decades, making it more challenging for the average resident to afford the cost of property in the country. It's quite similar to what happened in 2008, when people invested in real estate before the construction phase even started, with hopes of potentially using the extra properties to earn passive income. Many people were investing funds into the real estate market with hopes of building generational wealth. In fact, the country stores a whopping 70% of its wealth in real estate alone. But when the real estate market collapsed, so did the investment opportunities for the people of China, causing everything to fall apart at the seams. The Evergrande crisis is a prime example of the current financial crisis happening throughout the country. As a property developer with more debt than any other across the globe, the organization is struggling to pay what it owes. It has become increasingly challenging for it to cover the debt when Chinese residents have stopped paying their mortgages. Evergrande is currently working on restructuring a payment plan to help with the debt. Even so, this entire situation only contributes to the property crisis throughout the country, causing the sector's value to drop. In the past, people were okay with investing in properties before contractors began building them. But many are no longer accepting this and have refused to make mortgage payments. Problems within the real estate market have existed for several decades but have quickly become exacerbated by China's strict COVID policies. Now, the people of China are taking action, joining in on protests as victims of rotten tail buildings, otherwise known as unfinished projects. Thousands of people gathered together in Xi'an, China, to surround the Shanxi Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission to protest illegal lending while refusing to pay their mortgages due to unfair and unethical practices. While the people of China need to take this stand, withholding mortgage payments can contribute to the economy's collapse because of China's tremendous debt. While the number of residents withholding mortgage payments is unknown, many would be willing to make payments when developers finish the construction process. Until then, they don't feel comfortable putting money into something that simply doesn't exist or isn't ready for them to use. Of course, these protests didn't sit well with the CCP and resulted in them ordering police to use violence against anyone protesting, including the elderly and disabled. In reality, the CCP is afraid of losing its reign over the people of China as they stand up for themselves and refuse to essentially be bullied into paying a mortgage on an unfinished or non-existing home. The Chinese Communist Party believes that these protests are political in nature and have nothing to do with a banking crisis. However, the numbers portray a different, much more explicit story. For example, according to CNBC, property sales in China are set to drop by a staggering 30%, even worse than the financial crisis that occurred in 2008. During that period, sales dropped by 20%, which was enough to cause massive economic disruption. Many believe that the situation in China is much worse than the economic collapse that occurred in the United States in 2008. The financial crisis that occurred in 2007 and 2008 created a tremendous strain on the American people since the Great Depression of 1930 and was caused by a combination of problems that led to a domino effect, including lack of financial regulation, risky investments, excessive borrowing, and predatory lending, to name a few. China faces a similar situation, magnified by additional economic issues, including its rigid COVID-19 policies and massive debt. China currently has less debt than the United States, but will continue experiencing an economic slump as home buyers choose to withhold mortgage payments and international travel to the country remains low. A lack of economic growth continues partly due to the zero-COVID policy, but also because the housing market is collapsing and the job market is declining. The job market in China is ready to implode, causing the unemployment rate to skyrocket. The current unemployment rate for residents between the ages of 16 and 24 was at a shocking 19.9% in July, breaking a record for the number of jobless teens and young adults in the country, many of whom have noticed how difficult it has become to find work to support themselves or their families. The high unemployment rate is a telltale sign of the economy's downward spiral. Although there is so much happening in China, from the mortgage crisis to the COVID policy, bank freezes and job market slump that put the economy at risk of sudden collapse, most people outside the country are unaware of what's going on. So why is that? Why is a massive mortgage revolt happening and we have yet to hear much about it? Well, the CCP has been hard at work, continuing to censor any news related to the crisis to hide what is happening in the country. Property sales are down, People are not paying their mortgages because the homes and apartments aren't finished, and the banks have been frozen due to a long-lasting scheme, yet there's little to no buzz about the situation online. Everything happening simultaneously is sure to cause a domino effect where the banking system collapses along with the Chinese economy. But the CCP doesn't want us to know that. Some of China's wealthiest residents are choosing to move out of the country and relocate elsewhere. And there's a reason for that. Why would someone want to migrate out of China, a place they've called home for decades? Perhaps it's because they want to escape mass destruction that may occur at any given moment due to the economic collapse. Unfortunately, censorship is at an all-time high in China. Unlike the countries where residents have more personal freedom, China controls the content posted on the internet. CCP believes that it doesn't infringe on Chinese residents' right to free speech, even though censorship does just that. Because the government has such control over what gets posted online, it's often much more challenging for the average person from any other country to find information about the economic crisis and what's going on amongst the people of China, many of whom are tired of the CCP and its tactics. China uses propaganda to promote the government's views instead of the views of those who live in the country. Propaganda enables the government to have more social control over its people. However, some see past these tactics and have had enough of it, ultimately choosing to join the revolt against the CCP. More protests in China are happening now than ever before, and with genuinely good reason. So, what does the future have in store for China? That is yet to be determined. The country is facing economic collapse and has new problems to worry about, including a large number of empty houses and a declining population. The population decline is a direct result of China's one-child policy, enacted in 1979. It wasn't until 2016 that the government passed the two-child policy, intending to increase the population. However, the decline has already taken quite a toll and will only contribute to the downfall of China's economy. Will we see the people of China overthrow the CCP at some point? Only time will tell.